What makes a man truly evil? Is it his actions, his thoughts, or the way he treats those around him? The ancient Stoics believed that a man who lives only for himself, without honor, without virtue, without regard for others, is already lost. His greed, his deceit, his selfish ambition, they all betray a mind enslaved by weakness, not strength. Have you ever stood before a grand statue, only to realize that beneath its polished surface, the stone is cracked and crumbling? This is the nature of an evil man, one who appears whole but is fractured at his core. Bernie Madoff was once hailed as a financial genius, a Wall Street titan who promised wealth and security. Investors trusted him, believing in his charm and credibility. But beneath the polished image lay a massive Ponzi scheme, the largest in history. When the truth surfaced, thousands lost their life savings, and Madoff's empire crumbled. Like a grand statue hiding deep cracks, his facade of success concealed the corruption within until it was too late. Evil does not always arrive with a shout. More often, it whispers. It does not wear a monstrous face but hides behind charm, wealth, and false virtue. The Stoics taught that character is fate. A man's nature is not revealed in his words but in his habits, his choices, and the way he treats those who can do nothing for him. As Epictetus warned, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Likewise, it is not what a man claims to be, but how he lives when no one is watching. That defines him. Today, we expose 9 signs of an evil man. Patterns of thought and behavior that reveal a soul ruled by self-interest, devoid of wisdom, and blind to virtue. These are not mere flaws, they are warnings, the kind that must not be ignored. The wise man does not look away from what is uncomfortable. He faces it, lest he fall into the same traps himself. This is not a lesson in fear, but in discernment. To know evil is to guard against it. To understand corruption is to ensure it does not take root within us. So let us sharpen our perception, strengthen our resolve, and move forward with the clarity that only truth can provide. Let us begin. Sign number 1, he has no inner discipline. A man without discipline is like a ship without a rudder, adrift, vulnerable, and at the mercy of every passing storm. To live without reflection, without a foundation of inner strength, is to surrender oneself to chaos. A man who does not cultivate stillness, who does not set aside time to examine his thoughts and actions, has already lost control of himself. His life is dictated not by reason, but by impulse. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Retreat to this place often." But the undisciplined man does not retreat within. He does not examine himself or seek wisdom. Instead, he drifts from one pleasure to another, from one distraction to the next, never stopping long enough to ask the most important question: am I becoming the man I ought to be? Look at the great warriors and thinkers of history, those who shaped the world not through brute strength alone, but through mastery of the self. The Roman general who reviewed his failures after every battle. The philosopher who sought solitude each morning to clear his mind before facing the world. Their strength did not come from mere strategy, but from their ability to rule themselves before ruling others. Now contrast this with the man who refuses self-discipline. He is ruled by pride, convinced he has no need for reflection. He does not pause to correct his course until he is already lost. He seeks wisdom only when he is desperate, much like a man who ignores the need to train until he finds himself on the battlefield, unprepared and defenseless. Such a man moves through life consumed by external concerns, status, wealth, pleasure, yet never stops to examine his own mind. He allows his emotions to dictate his actions, reacting in anger, envy, or arrogance. Without discipline, he is easily swayed by the opinions of others, shifting his values to fit whatever serves him in the moment. He is a servant not to virtue, but to convenience. Imagine a man climbing a great mountain. At the base, the path is easy, the air warm, the climb gentle. He sees no need to prepare, no need to train his mind or body. But as he ascends, the air grows thin, the path steepens, and fatigue sets in. Now discipline is no longer an option, it is survival. If he has not strengthened himself beforehand, he will fail when it matters most. Seneca warns us, "A man is as wretched as he has convinced himself that he is." The undisciplined man convinces himself that he is strong when he is not, that he is wise while ignoring wisdom. He believes that without stillness, without reflection, he can build a life of meaning. But his foundation is weak, and when the weight of the world presses down, the cracks will show. Consider also the man who trains daily, not just in body but in mind. He rises early, not because he is forced to, but because he knows that strength is built in small, consistent efforts. He examines his failures not to dwell on them, but to learn from them. He embraces hardship, knowing that comfort breeds weakness. When adversity comes, he does not panic. He has prepared for it. If you seek strength, do not wait until you are forced to find it. Cultivate discipline now. Make time for reflection. Set aside moments of stillness. Ask yourself, am I truly in control of myself, or am I merely drifting? If the answer is unclear, then the work begins today. Sign number 2, a man who rejects correction. To reject correction is to reject growth. A man who refuses to be corrected is like a captain who ignores a storm warning. He may continue sailing for a while, but eventually the waves will break him. Pride blinds him to his own flaws, and in doing so, seals his fate. He does not wish to be better. He only wishes to be right. Marcus Aurelius warned, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after, and the truth has never harmed anyone." But the foolish man does not seek truth. He resents it. He takes correction as an attack, an insult to his ego, rather than an opportunity to improve. Look at history and you will see two types of men: those who welcomed correction and rose to greatness, and those who rejected it and were destroyed by their own arrogance. The wise general studies his defeats, knowing that pride on the battlefield leads to disaster. The foolish king, however, surrounds himself with flatterers who tell him what he wants to hear, until his own blindness leads to his downfall. A man who resists correction prioritizes his ego over reality. He builds walls around his flaws, protecting them instead of fixing them. And in doing so, he traps himself in a cycle of repeated failure. His mistakes are not accidents, they are choices. Choices to ignore wisdom, choices to reject improvement, choices to remain as he is, rather than become who he could be. This does not only affect him, it affects everyone around him. Friends grow weary of offering advice that is never taken. Mentors stop wasting their breath. Relationships suffer under the weight of his stubbornness. Like a tree that refuses to bend in the storm, he does not endure. He snaps. Now contrast this with the man who welcomes correction. He understands that every critique is a lesson, every mistake a teacher. He does not take offense when someone points out his flaws. He takes notes. He knows that the pain of correction is temporary, but the rewards of growth are lasting. Seneca put it plainly, "If a man is not fit to correct himself, what has he been doing with his time?" A wise man understands that correction is not humiliation, but refinement. A sword must be sharpened to be useful. A mind must be challenged to be strong. Consider two men. The first, when confronted with his mistakes, becomes defensive, argumentative, and bitter. He refuses to acknowledge his errors, blaming others, dismissing advice, or making excuses. His pride protects him today, but ruins him tomorrow. The second man listens. He absorbs the lesson, even if it stings. He does not need to be right, he needs to be better. Over time, this attitude turns him into a man of wisdom, strength, and resilience. When difficulty comes, he is prepared because he has spent his life learning, adjusting, and improving. Ask yourself, when someone corrects me, do I listen or do I push back, convinced that I already know best? The difference between a fool and a wise man is not intelligence, it is humility. True strength is not found in perfection, but in the courage to face imperfection and change. Sign number 3, he justifies his own corruption. A man who justifies his own wrongdoing is a man at war with reality. Instead of confronting his flaws with honesty, he seeks excuses. Instead of correcting his course, He persuades himself that no correction is needed. He doesn't struggle against his vices, he defends them, and in doing so, he ensures his own downfall. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." A wise man sees his faults as obstacles to be overcome. A foolish man sees them as inconveniences to be explained away. The difference is not in their circumstances, but in their willingness to face the truth. Look at history, and you will find men who justified their own corruption until it consumed them. The ruler who convinced himself that cruelty was necessary for order. The merchant who excused his dishonesty in the name of profit. The friend who betrayed another, claiming it was only self-preservation. They did not see themselves as evil, they saw themselves as justified. And that is precisely what made them dangerous. The man who rationalizes his own corruption doesn't stop at one excuse. Each justification builds upon the last, hardening his heart and blinding him to the consequences of his actions. He begins by telling himself that his small acts of deceit are harmless. Then, when faced with greater temptations, he convinces himself that his actions are necessary. Soon he is no longer just making excuses. He has become his excuses. Seneca warned, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." The man who justifies his vices lives in perpetual delay. He tells himself he will change, just not today. He will correct himself when the time is right. But time waits for no man, and the longer he resists the truth, the further he drifts from redemption. Contrast this with the man who faces his flaws without excuse. He does not sugarcoat his mistakes. He does not shift blame to others. He stands before the mirror of his own soul and says, "This is where I have failed. This is where I must change." And in that moment, he becomes stronger. Imagine two men at a crossroads. One acknowledges that he has taken the wrong path and turns back immediately. The other refuses to admit his mistake, pressing forward even as the road grows darker. Which of these men is truly lost? Not the one who corrects his error, but the one who refuses to see it. If we are honest, we have all at times chosen the path of justification. We have all made excuses when confronted with uncomfortable truths. But the question is not whether we have done so. The question is whether we continue to do so. Ask yourself, do I defend my flaws or do I defeat them? A man who justifies his own corruption is a man who will never improve. A man who confronts it is a man who will never stop growing. The choice is ours. Sign number 4, he fails to lead his own home. A man who neglects his duty to lead his own home is not merely passive, he's a source of disorder. Leadership within the household is not about control or domination. It is about providing direction, stability, and a foundation of principles. A home without leadership is like a ship without a captain, adrift, vulnerable to every storm. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A man must stand erect, not be kept erect by others." A leader does not wait for someone else to take responsibility. He does not shrink from the weight of duty. He stands firm, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. The man who abandons this role out of fear, apathy, or selfishness leaves his household unguarded, allowing confusion and weakness to take root. Look at history, and you will see what happens when men fail to lead. Consider the fall of great cities, not through external conquest, but through internal decay. Consider the families that collapse, not because of a single catastrophe, but because of years of neglect, indifference, and weakness. No fortress crumbles in a day. It happens brick by brick as those responsible fail to reinforce the walls. A weak man in the household creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, disorder thrives. His lack of discipline breeds chaos. His absence of moral direction leaves those under his care exposed to external influences. Where there is no guiding hand, something else will take its place, and it is rarely something good. Seneca warned, "Fate leads the willing, but drags along the reluctant." The man who refuses to lead will still be led, just not by his own reason. He will be governed by his impulses, his fears, or the expectations of others. His household will not follow his example of strength because he has given them no example to follow. Contrast this with the man who embraces his responsibility. He doesn't demand respect, he earns it. He doesn't impose discipline, he embodies it. His leadership is an act of service, not of pride. His family doesn't follow him out of fear, but because his actions inspire trust. Picture two homes. In one, the father is absent, not in body, but in presence. He is distracted, indifferent, and avoids difficult conversations. His children do not look to him for guidance because they have learned that he offers none. His household does not collapse overnight, but over time, its foundation weakens. In the other home, the father leads, not with force, but with example. He demonstrates patience, resilience, and wisdom. He does not run from responsibility, even when it is difficult. His household is not perfect, but it is strong because he has made it so. Ask yourself, do I lead my own life with purpose? Do I provide strength and stability to those who rely on me? Or do I expect them to find their own way while I stand idle? A man who fails to lead his home is not just failing his family, he is failing himself. Because to lead others, one must first master himself. Sign number 5. He neglects to provide for his family. A man who fails to provide for his family is a man who has abandoned his most fundamental duty. Provision is not merely about financial support. It is about ensuring the physical, emotional, and moral well-being of those under his care. A household without a strong provider is like a city without walls, defenseless, vulnerable, and exposed to chaos. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." A man who only serves himself, who prioritizes his own comfort over the security of his household, weakens not only his family, but himself. He seeks pleasure before responsibility, indulgence before duty, and in doing so, he ensures his own ruin. History is filled with examples of men who neglected their households and, in doing so, lost everything. Consider the gambler who wasted his fortune while his family lived in scarcity. Consider the ruler who was so obsessed with his own ambitions that he failed to guide his children, leaving behind a legacy of weakness and ruin. The pattern is always the same. A man who puts himself first at the expense of those who rely on him will ultimately have nothing left, not even his own dignity. A man who refuses to provide does not simply fail his family, he betrays them. His absence, whether financial or emotional, leaves wounds that may never fully heal. Children who grow up feeling abandoned learn to trust no one. A spouse left unsupported begins to resent rather than respect. A family that should be built on unity instead fractures under the weight of neglect. Seneca warned, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." The selfish man believes he can put off his duties, that there will always be more time to make things right. But misfortune does not wait, and when difficulty comes, the family he has failed to strengthen will not be able to withstand it. Now contrast this with the man who understands his duty. He does not see provision as a burden, but as an honor. He ensures his family is secure, not just with food and shelter, but with his presence, his guidance, and his protection. He does not disappear into his own interests, leaving his family to fend for themselves. He is present, he is reliable, and he is the anchor that keeps them steady. Imagine two homes. In the first, the father is distant, not in body, but in presence. He provides money but no wisdom, a roof but no security. His family drifts, each member disconnected, unsure of where they stand. When trouble comes, there is no foundation to hold them together. In the second, the father is not just a provider, but a leader. He teaches his children resilience, offering guidance not just in words, but in action. His spouse does not carry the burden alone because she knows he is there. Steady, unwavering. His home is not just a place to live, it is a fortress of strength and stability. Ask yourself, do I give my best to those who rely on me, or do I make excuses for my absence? Do I ensure their well-being not just with what I earn, but with how I live? A man who neglects his household is a man who builds nothing of lasting value. But a man who provides, truly provides, creates something that will endure far beyond his own life. Sign number 6, he associates closely with the corrupt. A man's character is revealed by the company he keeps. He may speak of virtue, discipline, and wisdom, but if he surrounds himself with the corrupt, His true nature is already exposed. No man remains unaffected by his environment. The people he allows into his life will either sharpen him or dull him, strengthen his resolve or weaken his character. A wise man chooses carefully. A fool convinces himself that he can walk through fire and not be burned. As Epictetus warned, the key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. Yet the man of weak character does the opposite. He aligns himself with those who indulge in deception, arrogance, and vice. At first, he may believe he is merely an observer, immune to their influence. But corruption is subtle. It does not announce itself. It seeps in slowly, reshaping his thoughts, dulling his conscience, making what was once unthinkable seem acceptable. History is full of men who sealed their fate through poor associations. Consider the ambitious leader who trusted flatterers instead of truth-tellers, only to find himself betrayed. He was not overthrown by a single act of treachery, but by years of surrounding himself with those who fed his weaknesses rather than challenge his faults. He did not choose his downfall in a single moment. He chose it in the company he kept. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." A wise man does not seek comfort in weak friendships. He seeks refinement. He does not surround himself with those who encourage his worst instincts, but with those who demand his best. Ask yourself, do the people around me make me stronger or weaker? Do they challenge me to grow, or do they pull me toward mediocrity? A man's path is shaped by those who walk beside him. Choose your company wisely, or risk becoming what you once despised. Sign number 7, he exhibits hypocrisy by displaying false virtue. A man who parades virtue while hiding corruption is more dangerous than one who openly embraces vice. He wears the mask of righteousness not because he seeks to be good, but because he wishes to be perceived as such. His words are well crafted, his gestures rehearsed, his image carefully maintained. Yet beneath the surface, his actions reveal the truth. Hypocrisy is not merely deception toward others. It is self-deception at its most corrosive. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." But the hypocrite does not concern himself with being good, only with appearing good. He adopts the language of wisdom, speaks of discipline and virtue, yet in moments when no one is watching, he betrays every principle he claims to uphold. His devotion to an ideal exists only when there is an audience. He does not strive for excellence, he performs it. History remembers the fall of men who built their legacies on false virtue. Consider the ruler who spoke of justice while secretly indulging in corruption. Consider the philosopher who wrote of moral restraint but lived in excess. Consider the man who lectured others on duty while shirking his own responsibilities. Each of them stood before the world, draped in virtue, yet time exposed them for what they truly were: frauds. The hypocrite does not seek self-improvement because he believes he has already perfected the art of illusion. He convinces himself that words are enough, that appearances outweigh actions, that as long as others believe in his virtue, he need not truly possess it. But deception cannot withstand time. What is hidden eventually surfaces, and when it does, the fall is far greater than that of a man who never pretended to be righteous at all. Seneca warned, "A good character, when established, is not easily overthrown. But when it is not sound, every pretense is soon detected." A man who dedicates himself to virtue does not need to announce it. He does not need grand displays of morality. His actions speak for themselves. The man of integrity does not wear virtue as a cloak, he embodies it. Contrast this with the man who seeks no audience for his virtues. He understands that moral strength is not found in performance, but in discipline, in restraint, in the choices made when no one is there to witness them. He does not act with honor to gain admiration. He does so because it is the right thing to do. Imagine two men. The first preaches honesty, but bends the truth when it serves him. He speaks of self-discipline, but indulges in excess behind closed doors. He demands integrity from others, but excuses his own failings. The second man says little, yet his actions align with his principles. He does not claim to be flawless, but he strives each day to be better. He corrects himself before he corrects others. The first man may impress for a time, but in the end, it is the second man who will endure. Ask yourself, do I seek to appear good, or do I seek to be good? Do my actions match my words, or do I live in contradiction? A man of virtue does not need to convince others of his righteousness. He simply lives it. Sign number 8, he lacks self-control. A man without self-control is a man ruled by everything except himself. He's like a city without walls, vulnerable to every impulse, every temptation, every external force that seeks to dominate him. He does not command his desires command him. He does not think before he acts before he thinks, and in doing so, he ensures his own destruction. As Epictetus warned, no man is free who is not master of himself. A man who lacks discipline is not free. He is a slave to whatever impulse rises in the moment. He allows anger to dictate his words, greed to shape his decisions, and lust to pull him into ruin. He cannot be trusted, not because he intends harm, but because he cannot prevent himself from causing it. His actions are not governed by reason, but by impulse. And so his life becomes a series of reckless choices, each leading him further from stability, wisdom, and strength. History is filled with men who destroyed themselves through lack of control. Consider the warrior who could not temper his rage and lost his kingdom in a moment of recklessness. Consider the ruler who indulged every pleasure until he became weak and unfit to lead. Consider the man who squandered his fortune, his health, and his family because he could not say no to his own desires. These men were not defeated by external enemies. They were undone by themselves. A man without self-control is dangerous, not just to himself, but to those around him. His temper flares unpredictably. His desires lead him into dishonor. His greed consumes more than he can afford. He does not make choices. Choices are made for him by his impulses. And when disaster inevitably strikes, he blames fate, circumstance, or others, never realizing that his downfall was written in his own lack of restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." A man who masters himself does not live at the mercy of his emotions. He does not allow anger to drive him into conflict, nor desire to lead him into weakness. He understands that true power is not in control over others, but in control over oneself. Now contrast this with the man who embodies discipline. He does not act on impulse, but on principle. He pauses before speaking, weighing his words. He does not seek pleasure at the cost of his integrity. He does not lash out in anger, knowing that a single moment of rage can undo years of respect. He governs himself, and because of this, he can be trusted, respected, and relied upon. Imagine two men standing at a crossroads. One follows every whim, every fleeting desire, every urge that calls to him. He tells himself that he is free, but in truth he is bound by his own lack of restraint. The other man chooses his path with intention. He does not give in to the first temptation, nor the second. He moves with purpose, unaffected by distractions, because he knows where he's going. One man is lost, the other is in control. Ask yourself, am I ruled by impulse or do I rule myself? Do I control my emotions or do they control me? A man without self-control is a man destined for ruin, but a man who disciplines himself, who masters his mind and actions, is unshakable. He does not fall easily because his foundation is strong. Sign number 9, he displays hostility toward those who speak the truth. A man who reacts with anger when confronted with the truth does not reject the words themselves. He rejects the accountability they demand. The truth is often uncomfortable because it exposes weaknesses, contradictions, and the flaws we would rather keep hidden. But instead of listening, reflecting, and adjusting his course, the weak man lashes out at the messenger. His hostility is not a display of strength, but of fear. Fear of change, fear of humility, fear of facing himself. As Epictetus warned, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. The man who despises correction is not in control of himself. He is ruled by his pride, his ego, and his resistance to anything that challenges his self-image. He convinces himself that those who criticize him are his enemies when, in reality, they may be the only ones offering him a path toward growth. History remembers countless men who sealed their own downfall by refusing to listen. Consider the tyrant who surrounded himself only with those who praised him, ignoring the warnings of wiser counsel until his empire crumbled. Consider the arrogant scholar who dismissed criticism, believing himself above correction, only to be outmatched and forgotten. These men were not defeated by their critics, they were defeated by their inability to hear them. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free, and there is no greater act of bravery than facing the truth about oneself." A man who welcomes honest criticism is a man who seeks wisdom over comfort. He does not attack those who challenge him. He thanks them. He understands that real progress requires discomfort, and that a life built on lies, even comforting ones, is destined to collapse. Imagine two men confronted with a hard truth. The first grows defensive, dismissing the words, attacking the one who spoke them, and retreating deeper into his self-made illusions. The second, though shaken, listens. He does not respond with anger, but with reflection. He does not see truth as an enemy, but as a guide. One man remains stagnant, the other grows. Ask yourself, do I resist truth or do I embrace it? Do I attack those who challenge me or do I learn from them? A wise man does not fear correction. He welcomes it, knowing that truth, no matter how painful, is the key to his strength. Thank you for watching and taking the time to reflect on these truths. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who may need it today. The world is full of distractions, but wisdom belongs to those who seek it, challenge themselves, and walk the harder path. If you found value in this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video. And before you go, drop a comment below with the words "strength over deception," because true power lies not in appearances, but in the courage to face reality. Remember, growth is a lifelong pursuit. Every challenge, every hard truth, every moment of discomfort is an opportunity to rise above who you were yesterday. Stay strong, stay disciplined, and I'll see you in the next video.